Hi, and welcome to this introduction to MPFB2. MPFB2 is a free and open source human generator implemented as an add-on for Blender. With MPFB2, you can model human characters, rig and post them, equip assets such as clothes, save and load character presets, and set up sculptor projects. If you have not encountered MPFB2 before, I encourage you to follow the links in the description of this video and read some of the FAQ items. These will provide some context information that will hopefully prevent some of the most common misunderstandings. At the point of making this video, the second alpha of MPFB2 has been released, and the third is on the way. As MPFB2 is still in an alpha stage, things change a bit in the UI. Hopefully, things should be recognizable enough to follow if you look at this video at a later point in time. In this tutorial, I will cover most of the basics needed to get up to speed with using MPFB2. For several of the topics covered, there are more in-depth videos specifically for those. What is covered in this particular video are only the basics. Once you have started using MPFB2, you will find that there is plenty more to discover. We will begin with installing MPFB2 and the assets it needs. Take a look at modeling and posing, discuss assets and materials, find out how to save and load characters, introduce basic sculpting operations, and cover how you can migrate existing MakeHuman projects to MPFB2. Finally, we'll take a look at some ways to get help if you get stuck or when you encounter a bug. But let's start with the installation. The first thing you need is a modern installation of Blender. Blender as such will not be covered in this video. I will assume that you know your way around it reasonably, at least enough to start it and perform some basic operations. Then you need the MPFB2 add-on, obviously. Finally, in order to have the basic assets available, you will also need at least the system asset pack. From the home page, you can find the link to the Tux family directory where the add-on lives. It is important to note that what you want is always the latest nightly build. At this point in the development, that is where all the recent bug fixes will be. While it is possible to download something called a release, there is in practice no difference between a nightly build and a release. A release is just a nightly build that was renamed at a point in time. Then you need a system asset pack. This can be found under Assets on the home page. The system asset pack contains all the basic shapes and materials, things such as eyeballs and standard skins. In Blender, you can now go to Edit and Preferences and Add-ons. Here you can click the Install button and find the MPFB2 zip you downloaded. When having selected the zip, it is normal that it might take several seconds for the Blender UI to react. Enable the add-on and save the preferences. You should now have an MPFB2 tool shelf. Here you can find the Apply Assets and Library Settings panel. This will include a Load Pack from Zip button. Click this and find the zip file you downloaded. Again, it might take a few seconds for the UI to react. Now we need to restart Blender for the changes to take effect. Before continuing, let's say a few more words about asset packs. On the asset packs page, you can find several other packs apart from the system asset pack. In order to get the most out of MPFB2, you will most likely want to download several, if not all, of these. The asset packs contain assets such as clothes contributed from community members. You can install these using the same install button as you used when installing the system asset pack. Remember to restart Blender after having installed new asset packs. Anyway, we should now have a functional MPFB2 installation and can start with some real modeling. The first thing to do is to create a new human from scratch. Here you can find some basic parameters you can use to set a rough outline of how you want the character to look. These settings are just a start and can all be changed later on, so just choose approximately what you want here. Once having created the character, you can fine-tune the settings you entered on the first panel. To do so, select the character and find the Model panel and the Phenotype sub-panel. If you are used to MakeHuman lingo, the phenotype is what will be called macro details in MakeHuman. Before continuing with modeling finer details, we will want to set the skin so we can better see what the end result might look like. Back in the modeling panel, let's tweak some facial details. There are quite a lot of these settings, and I will not be covering them all. My suggestion is to simply play around with the settings and see what happens. With a basic character shape in place, we will be interested in seeing it posable. There is a point in adding a rig early, preferably before adding any clothes or body parts. This is because if the rig is present when we add the assets, then these will be automatically rigged. Adding a rig afterwards is somewhat cumbersome. On the Rigging and Add Rig panel, you can find options for what kind of rig to add. There are a few ways to go here, depending on what your end goal is. For example, if you intend to export your character to Unity, you will want to use the game engine rig. Or if you are comfortable with Rigify since before, then you might want to go the Rigify route. For this tutorial, we will use the default standard rig, since it comes with a few helpers that might make life easier. So we click the Add Standard Rig. Here we could simply go to pose mode and move the rig around, but we can get more utility than a plain FK rig. So we go to the Rig Helpers panel and add helpers. I will here enter wireframe mode a bit in order to not get banned from YouTube. As you can see, you have now access to IK bones for easily moving stuff around. There are several options for what kind of helpers you might want, but it is out of scope for this video to describe these. Again, I encourage you to play around with the settings to see what happens. Now that we have a rig in place, it is time to equip body parts and clothes. Note that at this point, I have installed some extra asset packs, namely the Dress 01 and System Materials packs. We will start with adding eyes. We'll get back to changing the color later on. Then we need eyebrows. And eyelashes. Hair is usually a good idea. If you have installed the System Materials pack, it is now also possible to change the hair color. We'll select the reddish hair color here. In order to be able to show the character in full view, we will need some clothes. We'll select a dress by Margaret Toigo, who by the way have contributed quite a lot of the assets that are shared on the CC0. We might as well add some shoes too. Now this is starting to look like a viable character. Many aspects of the materials in MPFB2 are procedural and can thus be tweaked from within the UI without having to draw a new diffuse texture. We will start with the eyes. First, select the eyes. These are called high poly here in the list, but could also have been selected in the viewport. Material settings can be changed in the Materials section in the Properties panel. Let's change the color to a greenish tint. The skin, too, can be tweaked. Maybe we want a somewhat paler hue. And possibly we want somewhat darker red lips. There are many other aspects of the eyes and skin materials, and I will not cover them here. Again, just play around with the settings and you should be able to interactively see what happens in the viewport. The final aspect of materials need a shading editor. Maybe we want to override the color of the dress, but still keep the transparent parts. We can then change the strength of the diffuse texture to 0 and choose a different color. Now that we have a character we're satisfied with, we want to save it as a preset in order to be able to quickly load it in new scenes. Save files are called presets in MPFB2 and can be managed on the Manage Presets panel. As you can see, it is possible to manage human, skin, and eye presets separately. We will store the human as a preset here. This will store information about the body shape, the selected rig, equipped assets, and material settings in a JSON file in your configuration directory. Now we can delete the character and later recreate it from the new human panel. Before continuing, I'll just mention what is not saved in a preset. A preset is just a list of modeling parameters, assets, and material settings. It is not a blend file, and it does not store the actual mesh. Thus, if you make changes to the actual mesh, for example by moving or deleting vertices, then these changes will not be stored. Further, poses and rig helper settings are not stored either. If you want actual changes to the mesh to be saved, then you will have to save the blend file instead of using a character preset. Another area you might be interested in is sculpting. While MPFB does not implement any sculpting functionality in itself, it will help you with a good starting point. There are many different potential goals with sculpting, such as making a detailed 3D mesh or creating a normal map. For the latter part, there is already an in-depth video on creating normal maps in the MakeHuman channel on YouTube. So let's focus on setting up for sculpting 3D features. As a potential case, let's say we want to sculpt a muscular bowman standing in a classic bowman stance. We want more details than can be achieved with only using MPFB modeling sliders. We start with creating roughly the shape that we want to work with. Then we add a rig and put the character in the pose we intend the final sculpt to be. At this point, we're happy with the start and want to proceed to the actual sculpting. So we select the base mesh and find Operations and set up for Sculpt panel. Now, this might look somewhat intimidating, but most of these settings can just be left as is. The overall goal is to prepare the character mesh for sculpting and removing obstacles that might get in the way. The most important setting is the strategy. Roughly speaking, the first two options are for when you want to bake a normal map. In that case, you would not want to change the mesh you already have. Rather, you would want to prepare a copy to perform the sculpt on. In this case, though, we're perfectly happy with setting up a sculpt on the mesh we already have, so we select the origin strategy. The next decision you will have to make is what kind of resolution strategy you want. To simplify a lot, if you want to be able to use existing MPFB2 skins, accept the default and set up a multi-res modifier. In the majority of cases, this is what you want. The alternative would be to not set up a multi-res modifier and instead go for dyntopo. If you intend to do a radical topological change to the mesh, such as adding extra arms or wings, then untick this checkbox. The next setting is how high resolution you want. This can be increased later on, and 3 levels of subdivision is a sensible choice. If you are low on computer power, you might want to settle for 2. The rest of the options can safely be left at their defaults. Only change these if you intend to do the corresponding operation manually before entering sculpt mode. So now we're set and can enable sculpting. It will take a few seconds to finish. Now, this isn't a tutorial on sculpting, but at this point, just go at it as you would normally do when sculpting. Again, if you want a more in-depth tutorial or are interested in baking normal maps, see the separate video in the channel. The next part of the tutorial concerns MakeHuman and how to migrate MakeHuman projects to MPFB. If you have never heard about MakeHuman or do not intend to use it, you can safely skip ahead a bit. First, a few words about the relation between MakeHuman and MPFB in order to hopefully avoid some confusion. It is important to note that MakeHuman and MPFB are two different projects with separate codebases. MPFB2 is not version 2 of MakeHuman. It is version 2 of MPFB. Whereas MakeHuman is a standalone application which has been around for some 15 years or more, MPFB is a Blender add-on which only recently saw the light of day. This said, MPFB uses the same asset formats as MakeHuman, making it completely forwards compatible. You can open a MakeHuman model in MPFB, and you can use the same close files in MakeHuman and MPFB. All in all, MakeHuman can be thought of as MPFB's now somewhat quirky old grandfather, sitting in his rocking chair complaining that the youth these days prefers being Blender add-ons instead of being standalone applications as in the good old days. Anyway, I said it is possible to reuse MakeHuman models in MPFB. I will here demonstrate 2 different approaches. So let's first create a character in MakeHuman. Then we make sure that the socket server is enabled. In MPFB, we can now go to the new human from MakeHuman panel and import it online. What you get here is what you see in the MakeHuman viewport. Note that it is normal for this process to take some time, so don't be surprised if it looks as if Blender freezes for a few seconds. While this is convenient, it is important to note what you get here are baked meshes. You cannot continue modeling a character in MPFB after having imported it in this way. Or at least, you will run into some rather random phenomena if you try to. The other way is to instead import MakeHuman save files. So we save the MakeHuman character and note the file name. Then, in MPFB, we go to the new human from presets and import the MHM file. Doing this creates a character which is functionally equivalent of having created it from scratch in MPFB. The final part of the MakeHuman section is the preferences. If you want, you can tell MPFB to auto-discover the MakeHuman data directory, or explicitly say where it is. This way, MPFB will also find any assets which MakeHuman knows about. If you don't have any assets which only exist in MakeHuman, you might want to avoid this though. Enabling it will most likely clutter your asset library panels with duplicates of many assets. As a last part of this tutorial, I'll just mention some ways to get help and report bugs. Within the UI, you will find direct links to some web resources. Clicking on these buttons should open a web browser and navigate to the appropriate location. Before reporting a bug, it will be helpful if you first update to the latest nightly build to see if the problem is already solved, and that you read the FAQ item about what information to include in a bug report. Anyway, this concludes the tutorial. Thank you for watching and happy modeling.